Lindsay Stark'ı dinleyeceğiz. Lindsay Stark, Columbia Üniversitesi'nin zorunlu göç ve sağlık programında doçenttir. Kadınların ve çocukların çatışma durumlarında korunması konusunda 10 yılı aşkın deneyimleri var. Uygulamalı araştırmaları yönetiyor. Özellikle hassas ve analizi zor olan durumlarda sosyal ölçümler yapıyor. İzleme değerlendirme çalışmaları da yönetiyor. Bunları Afrika, Asya, Orta Doğu ülkelerinde yapmıştır. Aynı zamanda şu anda krizdeki çocukları koruma, öğrenim ağın baş araştırmacısı ve idari direktörü olarak çalışmaktadır. Bugün metodoloji konusunda bize kendi yaptıkları çalışmalardan örnek vererek burada bir interaktif çalışma da aramızda yapacağız. Çok teşekkür ederim.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for your dedication and commitment and energy levels, which you all still seem very engaged at what for me, I don't know what time or day it is anymore, but I am hoping that this session will be a little bit different from the other sessions, and you don't necessarily need to wait until I'm finished with the presentation to speak. We will try to have some integrated activities within the session as well. And so, really my goal today, I think all of you come with a number of skills and a number of methodologies at your fingertips already, and if you think of having a backpack with all of those tools and skills and methods, I'm hoping to add a few more methods today into your backpacks that I think can be especially useful for assessment and ultimately evaluation. I just want to recognize a couple of key questions when it comes to measurement that I think we all sort of deal with on an everyday basis, but maybe we don't explicitly think about or talk about as we go to either create our instruments or develop a methodology for assessment and evaluation. The first is conceptualization. So what is it we are actually looking at? If we are talking about mental health, for example, what does that mean? Does that mean PTSD? Does that mean something broader than PTSD? The operationalization of the issue. So how are we going to actually measure whatever construct we are talking about? So if we're talking about gender-based violence, what are the actual indicators, for example, that we are going to use to measure it? Prioritization, so if we recognize that there are a number of things that make up the constructs or the ideas that we are trying to measure, what is the most important piece within that? And underlying all of these aspects of measurement is this question of power. So whose voice are we really recognizing? Whose voice is really coming through? And I think we all develop surveys and instruments all of the time without actually really thinking about where the power lies, who is shaping the construction of the questions, who is doing the operationalization and the conceptualization of the area under study. So, just as an example, if we take gender-based violence, and I will talk about that throughout the presentation, and I'm picking up on what one of our colleagues had talked about earlier, one could think about a more economical, a more equitable way to come up with a construct of gender-based violence, where in theory we sampled people from around the globe, and we thought, what does it mean to think about gender-based violence? What are we actually talking about? But of course that's not the reality, and that's not the way gender-based violence or psychosocial well-being or health are actually constructed. There are people who are the decision makers who get to decide what goes in and what goes out. And so the methods that I want to talk about today are really an effort to try to shift and give back some of the power in the construction of the methodologies to the populations that we're actually talking about assessing. So I think in this context, Syrian refugees and potentially other refugee populations living in Turkey. And so, I think this is really just building on what I just said. The methodologies that I'm going to talk to today are really an effort to confirm, amend, or challenge or change conceptualizations of specific issues. We hope that through the utilization of these methods, we'll have varied evidence on how to operationalize these constructs. I hope the translators are able to keep up with me. We'll take a closer look at different ways to prioritize issues and to actually let the communities, local communities, determine the prioritization. And as I said, this is all an attempt to shift the power a little bit. So the first methodology that I want to talk through is what we call PRM. It's a participative ranking methodology. And we developed this in the program in Forced Migration and Health, but I'm sure as I talk through it, you'll recognize many elements. It really draws heavily on participatory rapid assessment and other participatory methods. And I can share this the manual with all of you, and I have another manual that I can share with you as well. But PRM, in addition to being participative ranking methodology, has a very handy acronym that really walks you through the various steps of the method. So the first step of the method, before you get to anything that you see up here on the screen, is to develop a framing question. And this is really where your power as the person leading this study comes into play. You get to develop the framing question. It could be as broad as what are the health needs of refugees who are coming in from Syria and Turkey. It could be what does it mean to be integrated into Turkish society as a refugee. Whatever that guiding question is, you recognize that that is something that you are creating based on where you are coming from and what you're interested in learning. But from that point, the power really begins to shift. And so the way the method works is you bring together a group or multiple groups of approximately 8 to 10 individuals, and you ask this framing question of the individuals. So in this case, I think we would be talking about Syrian refugees, depending again on what your question is. And the first thing that you would ask to do, so if we just take as an example, what are the health needs of refugees in Syrian refugees in Turkey? The first step would be to allow the individuals themselves to voice what they think are the health needs of their population. And so we've had a lot of presentations today on various health risks that we feel are really critical, that we feel haven't been looked at. And it would just be really interesting and useful, I think, to see whether those actually map onto what populations of Syrian refugees would say if you ask them through this methodology. So there's a free listing exercise where people can come up with whatever the health needs they feel are pertinent and are relevant. And there may be some negotiation. So, if somebody actually says, well, violence in the home is actually an important health issue that's not being looked at, and somebody else says, well, my, wives are getting beaten up. There may need to be some discussion. Okay, when you say violence in the household, is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something different? Do we need two different categories to represent beating of wives versus beating of children, for example? Or are these one and the same in a larger thing that we're calling household violence? For every category or concept that is identified and agreed by the group will identify an object to represent that issue. So it could be, we need a clean water source, and I'm going to pick this water bottle to represent that a health issue is actually access to clean water. And, sometimes it is just whatever object is around and there's really no meaning associated with it. But at other times, objects that people will select to represent the category of whatever it is they're talking about have some real relationship. And to hear people make that connection can be really quite powerful. So we used this methodology with refugee populations in Uganda, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And women were talking about rape and found a piece of charcoal and said, this charcoal represents the blackening of our soul and our spirit from when we're raped. So there are some very eloquent connections that people may actually make to those objects. Once you have an agreed upon amount of objects and categories, and again, you really need to do some work of keeping a balance. If you get up to 27 objects, it's going to become quite unwieldy and difficult. So usually having about 10 objects is a good amount of categories or objects before you want to start to close the conversation. There's a process where people rank the issues that they have now identified. Okay, so now we've come up with 10 different health needs that you've talked about. There's a big pile of objects on the floor in the middle. I'm going to draw a line and recognizing that all of the objects that are here are important. And that's a very important thing as a facilitator to emphasize. Every item that has been given an object has some level of importance to this group. But within that, you want to begin to ask the group to rank from most important, most severe to least severe. And so using this methodology, you get not only a sense of what are the critical issues, how are they conceptualized and operationalized by this community, but also how do they prioritize these needs or issues themselves. And throughout this process, of course, people are talking, people are making connections, people are describing what they're talking about. And so the M here stands for meaning in our PRM. And that's really how people are describing all of the issues that they're talking about. And I'm going to walk through an example of some of the uses of this method. These are just some images from various contexts in Nigeria, Uganda, and Indonesia. And of the different kinds of objects that people have found. You can see Nigeria was actually really difficult in that context. The only objects that people had were blue cups. So trying to remember which blue cup stood for what was quite constrained and difficult. But in other contexts, there were obviously more things to choose from. So just to walk you through an example of how this methodology was applied in one setting, and it's been used in many settings around the world at this point. One of the first uses of this method was in camps for internally displaced people in northern Uganda. And we had been invited by a Child Fund, by an international NGO, to come and help them understand issues of violence against women in that context. And they were particularly interested in 3 categories of violence: physical violence or domestic violence, marital rape, so forced sex by an intimate partner, and rape by somebody other than an intimate partner. But within that, they were actually interested in understanding, okay, we have funding to provide this gender-based violence program in these camps, but where do local populations actually see this issue compared to some of the other issues that they may be facing? And so we decided to use PRM, and we conducted 19 different PRM groups that were segmented by gender and age, wanting to understand, obviously, women and men's perspectives on the violence that was occurring, but also the experience and understanding of boys and girls who were often witnessing a lot of the violence in the households, and who obviously were sort of the next generation that were going to either be perpetrating or experiencing the violence. Half of the school children were out of school, and half of the children were in school. And the major framing question for this study was, what are the major issues faced by women in this camp? So here you can see across 4 camps the number of groups that were conducted and the mean findings based on rank. And one of the things that's quite powerful and quite interesting about this qualitative study is that you can actually look at the mean value and compare across different types of groups. So here you could actually see that in terms of domestic violence, or let's just take rape, young girls rank this as almost their #1 issue. This was perceived as a huge issue by young girls. Whereas if you looked at boys in an equal age range, they ranked the issue of rape by somebody other than an intimate partner much further down. And similarly, girls saw domestic violence as a huge issue, and adult women saw it as, again, not as high of a priority or an issue. So you can see some interesting patterns and begin through the analysis of the language to analyze why you might be seeing these differences across different groups. And again, this just shows both the finding, both a list of findings of different issues that also came up across these studies, and the kind of meaning that can be gleaned both by looking at the average rank. So did they rank the object first, second, third in the line in terms of prioritization, and also in terms of frequency. So across 20 groups, how often did the issue of insecurity come up? And so you can begin to see patterns that give you an idea of the strength of a certain concept or category from a specific population. So here, the issue of insecurity was mentioned in 16 groups and had an average rank of 1.4. So a pretty high frequency count as well as a high average. Whereas access to health care in this setting was only mentioned by 7 groups, and when it was mentioned was ranked much far down compared to some of these other issues. Any questions on this method, which I breezed through, I realize, but I do have a manual that I'd be happy to share with you. No? Okay, great. Just a little bit of some of the meaning and language that can come out of it. I'll just read 1 or 2 of these quotes. When the husband comes back home, this is the way this is a women's group speaking about marital rape. When the husband comes back home, be it lunchtime or evening, I make sure I send the children out immediately as he lies impatiently on the bed, waiting like an angry lion wanting to eat meat. Another quote, he doesn't respect me even if I am on my period, claiming he is the one who buys the soap to wash my blood. So through these kinds of quotes, you really get an understanding of the social construction of marriage in this setting and the social construction of an issue, in the case of those 2 quotes, the issue of marital rape. Okay, I want to come back now, again to these 4 critical challenges and thinking about PRM, the method that I've presented. You can get a sense of how that method responds to conceptualization. It is not me who is necessarily deciding what constitutes gender-based violence or quality health care. It is shaped by my framing question, but the conceptualization, the categories really come from the beneficiary population. And prioritization and power, I think, are also, obviously critical key shifts in terms of that methodology. I want to go through a second methodology, and for this one, I think the best way to introduce it is to actually do it ourselves first, and then come back and talk a little bit about the process. This consensus methodology is called the nominal group technique. And so in front of you, hopefully, unless you've been scribbling away on them, you should have 3 yellow Post-it notes. And if you don't have some, or if you lost them, or if you scribbled on them, come up and we have more. What I would like you to do is to think about the following question. What are the main barriers to providing, can I give these to you, Melissa? What are the main barriers to providing health services to refugee populations in Turkey? And on each of your note cards, on your Post-its, I would like you to write in just 1 or 2 words, nothing very long, 3 different barriers that you see as critical barriers. So I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to think about that and to jot something down on your note cards. 1 on each note card. Each person does 3 and write 1 barrier on each card. That's mine, actually. Okay. And what I would like you to do is together, each of you read what you have written down on your yellow Post-its as your 3 main barriers that you selected. And then together, as a pair, I would like for you to discuss and negotiate and agree 3 main barriers together. They could be, if you have the same barrier, that might end up being one. You might, through your discussion, identify a new barrier, or somebody might be really convincing and argue until the other person agrees. And I would like you to write those 3 agreed barriers on your green Post-its. And if you need help finding somebody who speaks the same language as you, come find me. Yes. I'm going to give you 2 more minutes. It's going to get a little more complicated. Okay. Your next challenge, once you have your 3 barriers on your 3 green Post-its, is to find another group of 2 who you can speak the same language with. And so now, as a group of 4, you're going to get 3 pink Post-its, and you're going to have to agree 3 barriers between the 4 of you. It's better if they can, or if they can. Is there any group that needs pink Post-its? Who have agreed on your 3 pink cards already? Your final task is to find another group of 4 and to agree on 3 final barriers with another group of 4. Before you do this, wait. Before you either continue your discussions with your pink cards, or for those ready, merge to join to start your discussion of your orange cards, here is your final instruction. Once you have your 3 agreed orange cards, I want you to find a place on the wall and put your orange cards at the top, your pink cards underneath, your green cards underneath those, and all of your yellow cards underneath those. Okay? Okay, good luck.
En üstte onlar, altta pembeler, ondan sarılar, ondan da yeşiller.
We can always see that we are not let us walk, license for walk for senior.
One more minute. Seats when you are done. We are waiting, I think, for one very strongly dissenting group to agree on their final orange card.